This isn't just about money. It's about a daughter's unspeakable betrayal. My grandmother's golden years were stolen, leaving her vulnerable and broken. A chilling family drama.
Grandma Rose had lived a life of quiet industry and careful planning. She had been a dedicated homemaker, a pillar of strength for her family, raising 2 children, my father, David, and his younger sister, Carol. My grandfather, her beloved husband, had been a meticulous planner, a man who believed firmly in providing for the future. Together, they had ensured they had a comfortable, secure retirement. They weren't wealthy in the extravagant sense, no sprawling mansions or private jets, but they were unequivocally secure. Their charming, modest home was paid off, a testament to decades of hard work. They had a modest but steady pension from Grandpa's long career and a healthy savings account that had grown steadily over decades of careful budgeting, diligent saving, and wise, long-term investments in what they considered safe blue-chip stocks. This money wasn't just numbers in a bank ledger. It represented their entire life's work, their countless sacrifices, every penny earned and saved with the dream of a peaceful, worry-free old age. It was meant to fund her comfort, her potential care needs in later life, and, crucially, to leave a small, thoughtful legacy for her children and grandchildren. It was the fruit of their lifelong labor, carefully tended and protected. My father, David, was very much his mother's son. He inherited Grandma Rose's gentle nature, her innate honesty, and her quiet sense of responsibility. He was a steady, dependable man, a devoted son who, even as his own life became busy, made it a sacred ritual to visit her every single Sunday. He'd always arrive with her favorite crossword puzzles, a bag of fresh groceries, and a patient ear for her stories, sharing anecdotes about his own week and making her laugh with observations about life. He worried about her constantly, often calling her midweek, offering to help with any chores, errands, or simply to just chat. He was the picture of a dutiful, loving son. However, he also had his own family, my mother, my siblings, and me, his own responsibilities, and he lived an hour's drive away. The distance, while not insurmountable, meant he couldn't be there every single day. He trusted that Grandma was safe, that her meticulous financial planning would see her through, and that his sister Carol, living closer, would provide a different, complementary kind of support. Then there was Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister, Grandma Rose's only daughter. Carol was a different force altogether. She had always been the more outgoing, the more vivacious, the more flamboyant one, a whirlwind of boundless energy and unbridled ambition. She thrived on being the center of attention, often holding court at family gatherings with excited, animated stories about her latest grand business idea, her exotic travel plans, or her recent, often turbulent romantic escapades. After a few rocky marriages and a string of entrepreneurial ventures that never quite seemed to take off, she had recently settled back in town, remarkably, just a few miles from Grandma Rose's home. Initially, this proximity seemed like an absolute blessing, a stroke of good fortune. "Oh, it's wonderful, dear," Grandma Rose would tell me over the phone, her voice filled with genuine contentment, her eyes twinkling with affection for her daughter. "Carol is so good about taking me to my doctor's appointments now, and she even helps me sort through all those tricky bills. It's a great help, really." We all breathed a collective sigh of relief, thinking Grandma had found the perfect companion and helper in her golden years. I saw Aunt Carol as a vibrant, if sometimes a bit self-absorbed and financially impulsive presence. She often spoke with dramatic flair about her various financial struggles, her latest brilliant scheme that hadn't quite panned out, or the crushing burden of student loan debt, though she'd been out of college for decades. And I distinctly remember a few conversations where she'd casually, almost offhandedly, mentioned how prohibitively expensive everything was becoming for Grandma Rose. You know, Mom's fixed income just isn't what it used to be, she'd say to me over coffee, or to Dad over the phone with a knowing, almost conspiratorial look. It's a real struggle for her to make ends meet these days, even with her savings. The cost of living is just astronomical. We, being naive and trusting, largely dismissed it as typical Carol exaggeration, her flair for the dramatic, or simply the unavoidable reality of rising costs in modern life. After all, Grandma Rose had always been so meticulously careful, so incredibly frugal with her money. She was a financial rock, or so we believed. The first faint tremor, the first subtle, unsettling sign that something was deeply, fundamentally off, didn't arrive with a bang, but with a creeping, insidious realization. It wasn't a sudden, shocking event, but a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of Grandma Rose's usual routines and her cheerful spirit. It wasn't just the strange, uncharacteristic comments about money that started filtering through our conversations. It was a disturbing pattern of behavior that began to emerge, slowly, undeniably. Grandma Rose, who had always cherished her small, independent outings, a weekly trip to the local library to pick up a new mystery novel, a gentle stroll through the familiar paths of the neighborhood park, or a rare, delightful lunch with an old childhood friend, suddenly seemed less inclined to venture out. "Oh, Carol says it's too much trouble for her to take me today, dear," she'd say over the phone, her voice tinged with a quiet apology that broke my heart. Or, "Carol is very busy today, dear. She can't spare the time to drive me." My father and I, independently at first, then exchanging increasingly puzzled, worried glances, started to notice that Carol was almost always there when we called Grandma Rose's house, always seeming to screen calls, always ready with a plausible but increasingly flimsy explanation for Grandma's dwindling social life and her growing reluctance to leave the house. It was as if a subtle, invisible barrier was being erected around Grandma Rose, a barrier built by Carol. One crisp autumn afternoon, during an unannounced visit, I noticed a strange, sleek electronic device positioned prominently next to Grandma Rose's old rotary phone. It looked like some kind of a voice-activated assistant or a specialized phone system, but it was set up in a way that seemed to automatically dial certain pre-programmed numbers or answer specific incoming calls, bypassing the need for Grandma to manually dial or even screen her calls. When I asked about it, trying to keep my voice casual, Grandma Rose just blinked, her eyes a little hazy. "Oh, Carol set that up for me," she explained, her voice a little too quick, a little too rehearsed. "She says it makes it much easier to talk to the bank and for my doctors to reach me." My gut tightened instantly. Easier or more controlled? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, prickling with a sudden, icy realization. This was the moment I truly understood. Grandma Rose, once so fiercely independent, so capable, was slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly becoming not just reliant on, but perhaps even managed by her daughter in ways that felt profoundly off. And that subtle, nagging discomfort would soon blossom into outright, undeniable alarm. The peace of her golden years was crumbling, and a sinister shadow was beginning to stretch across her once bright home. We just didn't know the full extent of the darkness yet. The subtle discomfort I felt quickly escalated to genuine, profound worry. It wasn't just the strange, out-of-character comments about money from Grandma. It was a disturbing, consistent pattern of behavior that began to emerge, undeniable and deeply unsettling. Grandma Rose, who had always reveled in her small, independent outings, her weekly trip to the local library for new books, a gentle stroll through the neighborhood park, or a cherished lunch with an old friend, suddenly seemed less inclined to venture out. Her explanations became increasingly vague, always citing Carol. "Oh, Carol says it's too much trouble for her to take me today, dear," she'd lament, her voice tinged with apology. Or, "Carol is very busy today, dear. She can't spare the time to drive me." My father and I, separately at first, then increasingly exchanging worried, knowing glances, started to notice that Carol was almost always there when we called Grandma Rose's house, always seeming to screen calls, always ready with a plausible but increasingly flimsy explanation for Grandma's dwindling social life and her growing reluctance to leave the house. It was as if a subtle, invisible, but undeniably suffocating barrier was being erected around Grandma Rose, a barrier built brick by invisible brick by Carol herself. Grandma was being isolated, slowly, meticulously. Then came the larger, undeniable red flags. My father, David, who had always had limited emergency access to Grandma's online banking, a privilege Grandma herself had set up years ago, valuing his technological savvy, suddenly found his access revoked. He tried to log in one evening to help Grandma check a recurring bill and found himself locked out. When he called the bank, his frustration palpable. They delivered a chilling piece of news. They informed him that Grandma Rose, accompanied by Aunt Carol, had come into the branch personally just weeks prior. Grandma, they stated, had requested that all online access, except for a single new online account Carol had helped her set up, be terminated. And, most damningly, all future paper statements for all her accounts were now to be sent directly to Carol's address, not to Grandma's home, but to Carol's. The last vestiges of Grandma's independent financial oversight were systematically being dismantled, one by cold, calculated step. My father immediately called Carol. The conversation was not just heated, it was a furious, desperate confrontation. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, Carol?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and raw fear. "Cutting off Mom's access? Diverting her statements? What are you hiding?" Carol's response was infuriatingly calm, laced with a venomous dismissiveness. "Dad asked me to take over everything, David. He's getting forgetful, you know that. He asked me to help manage it all. I'm just looking out for her best interests. You're too far away to manage her daily needs, and honestly, you don't even know how to use online banking properly for her accounts anyway." She twisted the knife, accusing him of trying to control Grandma's money for his own selfish reasons, of being jealous of her close relationship with their mother. It became a bitter standoff, the first open declaration of war in our family. Yet the true enemy was still veiled in deceit. I, sensing the rapidly deteriorating situation, began visiting Grandma Rose more frequently, often unannounced, trying to get a clearer picture of what was truly happening. And what I saw, what I observed, broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. She looked noticeably thinner, her once vibrant spirit seeming to dim with each passing week. Her clothes, once neatly fitted, now seemed to hang a little looser on her frail frame. Her once meticulously clean home now had a subtle, creeping layer of dust on surfaces, a few unwashed dishes perpetually in the kitchen sink. Small things, perhaps, but profoundly significant for Grandma Rose, who prided herself on her spotless home. And her demeanor had undergone a drastic transformation. She was more hesitant, less talkative, her eyes often seeming to glance furtively towards the door, as if expecting Carol to suddenly appear. When I gently, cautiously tried to ask about her finances or why Dad no longer had access to her accounts, she'd simply parrot, "Oh, Carol takes care of everything. She says it's much easier for me." Her voice would drop to a near whisper, her eyes wide, with a strange mix of fear and something akin to quiet desperation. It was tragically clear. She was being systematically isolated, and she was afraid. Afraid of Carol. Afraid of the consequences of speaking out.
My father and I, now working in grim tandem, began to meticulously compare notes, laying out every suspicious detail we had gathered. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly disparate, began to connect with a terrifying clarity. We realized that Carol had subtly, deliberately, and systematically cut off every single one of Grandma Rose's independent financial avenues. There were no more paper statements that Grandma could review herself, no more independent online access she could use. Every single financial interaction, every piece of information was now filtered exclusively through Carol. The initial red flags, once mere flickers, were now blazing, flashing neon signs in the deepening gloom. This was no longer just a concern. It was an undeniable, escalating crisis. Then came the really devastating financial hits. We stumbled upon them not through any official channel, but because Grandma Rose, in a rare, harrowing moment of profound clarity and deep distress, whispered a horrifying truth to my father. She confessed, given Carol some money for a very urgent business investment, a 6-figure sum. My father's face went white, a sum that, by all accounts, was a significant, irreplaceable chunk of her meticulously saved life savings. It wasn't just a loan. It was a gut-wrenching blow to her security. My father, his voice raw with a mixture of fear, rage, and profound disbelief, confronted Carol again. She met his fury with the chilling composure. She claimed it was merely a loan, a temporary bridge for a surefire opportunity that would double Grandma's money within months, making them all rich. But when pressed for details, for a loan agreement, for any tangible proof, she could provide nothing, just vague, empty promises and a series of increasingly frantic accusations that we were jealous of her business acumen, trying to derail her success, trying to steal from her. The audacity was breathtaking. We knew, instinctively, unequivocally, this wasn't right. Grandma Rose, meticulous and cautious to a fault, would never make such a high-risk, undocumented investment, let alone without consulting Dad, her lifelong confidant. Her mind, while still sharp for her age in many ways, was undeniably vulnerable to suggestion, especially from someone she loved and trusted implicitly. Carol, her own daughter, was exploiting that sacred trust. We knew we had to act, and act decisively. But how? How do you prove that someone is systematically stealing from their own mother when that mother is being subtly manipulated into complicity or heartbreaking silence by a complex web of fear, misplaced trust, and emotional dependency? This was textbook elder financial abuse, unfolding in agonizing slow motion right before our eyes. And we felt
utterly powerless to stop it without shattering what remained of our family peace.